A little ball next on the Michael Welch podcast.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one.
No podcast last week. I was sidetracked, so I do apologize for that. But not a lot of major movement last week in the college football landscape. Doesn't mean that there weren't fun games, as always. Our weekday games, we did have a couple of Thursday nighters. Arizona State moved to 3-0. How about that? 31-28 win over Texas State. It is sort of notable. Texas State has a pretty good squad out there, a pretty good program since bumping up to the highest level here of D1 football. And Arizona State went forks up in is it the Wildcats, the Bearcats, the Bobcats? There we go. The wrong kind of cats there in that ball game. He also had South Alabama play a shortened fourth quarter against Northwestern State because they walloped them 87-10. And as I'm finishing up this podcast here, it is about a 30-point lead they have on Appalachian State. So they'll move to 2-2 after probably 150 points over the past two games, which is pretty astounding in itself. But those South Alabama Cougars are pretty feisty. They're another kind of cat. I don't think they're the Cougars. Anyways, Friday brought us Kansas State, who's ranked 14th at the time, walloping number 20 Arizona 31-7. Now, we knew Arizona was questionable on defense. We thought the offense, though, would keep them in a lot of ball games, but that was not the case. Kansas State able to stay undefeated and move to 3-0. Avery Johnson fired up an explosive offense just like that and managed to win this one. 17 points in the second half here to just pull away from Arizona, who could not do a whole lot. 42 times the ball went in the air for Noah Fifta, 26 of them completed, no touchdowns. And McMillan, 11 grabs for 138 yards in this one, no scores though. He was blanketed in week two, a weird oddity. You'd expect him to have an opportunity at double-digit receptions every single time out. He's just a monster and able to keep things going was Kansas State. 110 yards on the ground for Avery Johnson. He's the leading rusher. 156 yards and 2 passing touchdowns, as well as they keep that ground game churning and stay in the race for the Big 12. Moving into Saturday, we have Kansas falling 23-20 to UNLV, so the Rebels stay at 3-0. They move up to 3-0, I should stay undefeated. Kansas is surprising 1-2. They're not super fun to watch. It is terribly, terribly disappointing to see Jalen Daniels has been mighty disappointing, completing just a touch under 55% of his passes. He's got twice as many picks as touchdowns. Devin Neal's still a monster. He's got over 300 yards through 3 games. He's averaging over 7 yards per pop. He's not hitting the end zone a whole lot, which is part of the problem. But it's unfortunate that our superstar quarterback here is really kind of a dud this season. Not quite sure what is going on there. Mighty disappointing, though. Moving into the Saturday slate, Georgia was the big game on the radar here. 13-12, they survive in Lexington against Kentucky. Kentucky not looking very good so far this year. They were absolutely shelled by South Carolina, which seems to be a bit above the mark that we thought they would be. A little bit of a pass rush, maybe an interesting quarterback, a couple spots that are interesting for the Gamecocks. Maybe they can make a bowl game, but they absolutely blanketed Kentucky last week. And so for Georgia to go in there and have some problems, not looking too good. Looking like there's a bit of a margin that's closing here between some of the top teams, although Ohio State is looking pretty fired up now. But maybe this is the rare blip for Georgia. Carson Beck, 15 for 24 for 160 yards. Less than 100 yards altogether on the ground, I believe, once you count sack yardage and stuff in there. Right around that number. Just couldn't get a lot going. And for Kentucky, they were 9 for 16 on third down. They had more yards, more first downs, fewer penalties, and were plus 10 in time of possession. They had the only turnover of the game. But, man, Georgia really struggled to get out of this one, but they managed to at the end here. Kentucky made a questionable call here to punt towards the end of this game rather than going for a fourth down conversion, which really wouldn't hurt them too much. And they could have had an opportunity to possibly win here, but made a questionable decision. That's, of course, being talked about. One of the major storylines coming out of this past weekend, because there just wasn't a whole lot going on, quite frankly. And Georgia, expected to see them step up a bit. Not necessarily expecting them to go undefeated throughout the season, right? Schedule gets a little bit tougher. They still have Alabama on board here. They still have Texas coming up here. They have Ole Miss, who's looking very good. Tennessee as well. I apologize. Alabama's not on the regular season schedule, so maybe SEC championship game. But still, Ole Miss, Texas on the road, and Tennessee at home gives them a few really good teams that they still have to play here. So we'll see what happens here with Georgia coming up. Just kind of a really strange football game, quite frankly, when you don't expect to see from them. We did have Texas, who was moved into number 1 on the AP poll, just kind of bumped everyone down a slot there. 56-7 over UTSA. I thought the Roadrunners would be a little bit better this season. They brought in some Power 5 or Power 4, I should say, transfers, buffed up the program a little bit there. Wasn't super sure about McGowan, son of the former journeyman backup quarterback there at QB position for the Roadrunners, Owen McGowan. But he's pitching the ball around quite a bit. I believe he's one of the leaders in passing yardage in the country. But they're just struggling a bit here. They got blown the hell out by Texas State, the Bobcats there, 49-10 last week. And they do have a win over Kennesaw State, 28-16. But man, Texas just beat the life out of them. The highlight of this game, though, was, of course, Quentin Ewers going down. That wasn't the highlight, the low light, I suppose. But, of course, we had Arch Manning coming in, throwing for 4 touchdowns and only 12 pass attempts, and breaking off a big 50-plus yard scramble, giving him 5 total touchdowns on the day. And he'll be starting this week against Louisiana Monroe while Ewers heals up there. Alabama, 42-10 over Wisconsin. The Badgers have not looked so great under Luke Fickell to start out his tenure. Merrill has 5 total touchdowns to account for the scoring margin there for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Tyler Van Dyke, the transfer out of Miami into Wisconsin, banged up in his own right for Wisconsin. They did not score once he went down. Trouble in paradise there for the Badgers. Ole Miss 40-6 over Wake Forest. Not a whole lot to say there. We know the Rebels are going to continue to score and run it up. There's been news circulating that Jackson Dart, they want to try to get in the running for Heisman there. So 2 touchdowns passing, 1 on the ground, over 400 yards of total offense for him, and 17 points in the second half while they shut out Wake Forest. Tennessee puts up 1 billion points on Kent State. Miami puts up 1 billion points on Ball State. Oregon fends off Oregon State 49-14 and looks more like the team we expect them to see. Their best win and their biggest win of margin for the season so far. Starting to look a little bit better and healthier there. Utah punches out the Utah State Aggies in their own rivalry game 38-21, but we do have a banged up quarterback there in the 20th year starter Cam Rising, who did not start because of his injury against Baylor last week, which was why this game was maybe a little bit closer than you would have expected. Oklahoma State crushes Tulsa 45-10. Hey, look, maybe a touch of defense shown by Oklahoma State. Not really. They are giving up more explosive plays than most of the country. I think they're in the top 10 in as far as 20-plus yard plays given up. Oklahoma rolls Tulane 34-19. Tulane's now 1-2, but this is still a really good football team. Oklahoma really winning more with defense than offense. They're not exactly putting a lot of points on the board. Jackson Arnold hasn't looked particularly dangerous. He had 2 touchdowns on the ground and almost 100 yards as well, so he can move with his legs. I haven't got a chance to put a whole lot of eyes on him, quite frankly, but they've got a big game coming up this week. Louisiana State, 36-33. Man, the Gamecocks almost got him. Would have been a big win, But instead, we got a couple of 2-1 teams coming out of this one as LSU survives 36-33 here. As I stated again, Gamecocks were up for a while in this one, but Nussmeier, 24 for 40, 285 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception, over 100 yards on the ground, 98 and 2 for Caden Durham at the running back position there. I'm not sure they have any like outstanding skill position guys there for LSU, but they're still kind of rolling in that offense there in South Carolina. So close. Raheem Sanders, 143 yards on the ground, a couple touchdowns. Lenoris Sellers, the quarterback there, again, better with his feet, 88 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground, 113 yards and a pick on only 16 pass attempts. And just very close there for South Carolina. They'll be interesting to keep an eye on for the rest of the season. Michigan 28-18 over Arkansas State. Just not a fun game. Notre Dame, though, bounces back 66-7 over Purdue. Nebraska 34-3 over Northern Iowa. And that's a lot of the highlights. Florida State moves to 0-3, while Memphis waxes them 20-12 on the road. Tough loss in Tallahassee for Florida State. Let's touch on just a few teams here moving to 3-0. How about Toledo? 41-17, beating Mississippi State on the road. A big win for the MAC there. Rockets 3-0. Who would have thought about that after some of the non-conference scheduling the MAC has to do? Indiana 3-0. 42-13 over UCLA. They're off to a hot start with a former MAC quarterback there from Ohio and Chris Rourke doing a pretty good job there. We do have UCF 35-34 over TCU, keeping the Knights undefeated. BYU hasn't been too impressive, but they win 34-14 over Wyoming. Unfortunately, kicking the Cowboys to 0-3. Not a very good team this year, as it turns out. And Cal 31-10 over San Diego State. Wins over Auburn and San Diego State now. Normally teams you'd consider to be pretty decent. I'm not sure how those wins are going to look at the end of the year, but they are 3-0 now. How about that? Can make a bowl game this year. Certainly not out of the question. One other thing of note, Colorado, which is also starting to quickly fly off the radar as they look like absolute junk this year, in a back and forth with Colorado State. And I don't know why you'd punch down to a Mountain West team. That just seems ridiculous. Colorado State speaking on how last season, Colorado said they just run over, the Rams, and they came into a fight. It went into overtime. Colorado really managed to win it by the skin of their teeth. Very fortunate. Actually, the defensive end that since graduated and moved on to the NFL was ejected in that game, but had a handful of sacks on Shedeur Sanders in that one. Didn't make it to overtime, unfortunately, but could have had a further impact in that game, possibly. And they were just talking about, how they could take on Colorado and their Instagram followers weren't going to save them and all this stuff. I didn't consider that too much trash talking. I mean, yes, you lost, but you should. This is a Power 4 program. You are a MAC conference school. And as I stated on previous podcasts, my thoughts on this rivalry, these are both rebuilding teams. You should be miles ahead as Colorado. So to continue this trash talking and Shedeur Sanders, trash talking the quarterback and stuff afterwards, 28-9 was the final, so they beat them by, a real score this time. But to refuse to shake hands afterwards and all that, it's just kind of crazy. They talk more trash than anyone. They should win by a bigger margin than that. It's just not impressive. They don't sound impressive. They don't look impressive. So to allow someone who's not necessarily on your level to get under your skin like that, I mean, that's how you hype up a program like Colorado State. You have to talk like that to think you're going to be in games like this. And you know what? They are for a while. So I just think it's ridiculous and not good sportsmanship on Colorado's side, quite frankly. Just, I don't know. I'll be glad when this is all done with. But I don't know what it's going to look like next year when Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter are in the NFL, because Colorado may be a 2-win team next year if we can't get some turnaround here in that program. So Just better keep that in mind. My God, South Alabama scores again. If they score 50-plus points on the weekdays, does that mean we're hitting a lot of unders on the Saturdays? That just doesn't seem to bode well. Anyways, your watch guy, week 3. South Alabama, Appalachian State on Thursday is done. So we're heading to Friday. Couple quarterbacks that'll be kind of fun on Friday the 20th. 7:30 ESPN. Syracuse will be hosting Stanford. Syracuse, heavy favorite here, about 8.5 is where I see it right now. We, of course, get Kyle McCord, the former Ohio State Buckeye here, slinging it with the Syracuse Orangemen. They haven't necessarily been impressive this year. They managed to fend off Georgia Tech last week. They beat Ohio the week before, but they're giving up about 24 points per game to these teams, and they haven't scored 40 yet, which is not an impressive statistic. But what I'm trying to say is Stanford can possibly win this game. They are 1-1 right now. They haven't played anybody so far. And Ashton Daniels, a quarterback that I've spoken before about, completing 62% of his passes, not super exciting, 6.61 yard average, not throwing a ton downfield, 3 touchdowns, an interception. He's taken 5 sacks. Again, he doesn't play with the most talented team here at Stanford. He's actually leading the team in carries. He's got twice as more as a second leading carrier on the team, and he leads by twice as many yards, 118 yards. But he's a capable thrower. He's a capable runner, and he has some good receivers. Ehrlich, Imauer, I can't say any of these names right, but 147 yards so far, over 14 yards per reception. Ismail Kissy, 8 yards per reception, and he's got a spattering of others as well that have made some catches. So not super impressive Stanford team. They will not be going to a bowl game, but they can put up some points, and I just like the quarterback here. And Syracuse seems more than willing to put up some points. Now, again, it makes sense that they're favored by more than a touchdown, but I'm just saying, there's worse things you can be watching on Friday night than a couple of lower-level Power 4 schools going at it. Syracuse hosting Stanford on ESPN at 7:30, and then at 8 o'clock, number 22 Nebraska is hosting number 24 Illinois. This is the game getting all the hype, right? A couple 3-0 teams. Nebraska looking good there. New quarterback. Illinois, a little bit surprising. Good defensively. Nebraska's still favored by a touchdown here currently at home with a 42.5 point over-under. So not a lot of points expected here. Huskers have beat UTEP, Colorado, UNI, not you and I, but Northern Iowa, a decent FCS level school. And they've looked very good so far. Dylan Raiola has not really been challenged much. He's completing almost 74% of his passes. He's had 1 turnover. He's been sacked 1 time. Isaiah Neor at receiver has been quite good for him, averaging 15 yards per reception and a dozen balls. Ja'Cory Barney and Raheem Johnson have both been quite frequent recipients of his as well. Now it's Johnson and Johnson out of the backfield, both Raheem Johnson, the running back there, and Emmerich Johnson, who have been great ball carriers as well. So we've got just talent all over the place here. Seems like a pretty good offensive line that they've been challenged particularly well, and the defense is playing well too. So to me, it's whether or not Illinois can really successfully move the ball here and kind of keep pace with Northern Illinois, and whether the quarterback here for Nebraska is going to, how many problems he's going to have with the Illini, who've allowed 0 points to Eastern Iowa, 17 points to Kansas, and 9 points to Central Michigan in their wins so far this season. This will be a fun game in the Big Ten. Quite a few surprises here. Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, all looking very good so far to start off the season. Following that game, that's on Fox. Following that game, the CW network, oh boy, CW, at 10 o'clock will be hosting Washington State and San Jose State, a couple of undefeated teams. Cougars favored by double digits here. Points expected in this one. San Jose State, now 3 wins is quite a few for this team. They're not too far removed from 2 or 3 win seasons. Of course, their coach moving on to Arizona. They are taking the former position after Judd moved up to Washington. So new staff here taking over. Wins over Sacramento State, at Air Force, which is a good win, and Canisius State to start off the season. And they have a fairly decent squad here. And the Mountain West will be able to compete. A decent quarterback there, and Emmerich Brown. He's not completing a particularly high percentage number of his passes at 60%, but pushing the ball slightly downfield, more than a few of these guys at 8.8 yards average. We have a decent running back here in Floyd Chalk the fourth. And the defense has been doing a fine job as well. But again, we have a couple nobodies, even for San Jose State on that schedule. Washington State, surprisingly, won the Apple Cup last week against Washington. Did a great job in that one. 24-19 was the final there. They have not had to leave home yet. Portland State and Texas Tech, the other wins. Texas Tech looks pretty damn miserable. So not a lot of challenges there, I would say. Putting up a lot of yards through the air. John Mater, the quarterback there, completing just under 53% of his passes, but they're able to get the offense really rolling there when they need to. They were challenged by Washington last week, though. So this could be a very interesting game here at the back end of the triple header on Friday. So this is a pretty good slate. One of the ranked matchups here with Illinois and Nebraska sitting nicely at the 8 o'clock slot. You can get a peek at Stanford-Syracuse as you're starting that and kind of flip around. And then at 10 o'clock on the back end, San Jose State, Washington State, giving us just a nice little beauty of a Friday night here on the schedule heading into Saturday. So the nooner slate is a bit light. We have 10 games, which makes the watchable stuff not a lot to pick from, quite frankly. Clemson's in the rankings at number 21 right now. They're hosting NC State on ABC. I think this is the top watch, despite the fact that Clemson's heavily favored. 18-plus points right now. They have looked really good, I guess, recently, despite the fact that they were obliterated by Georgia. I guess we know they're not in national championship competition. They wailed on Appalachian State 66-20 and took a week off since we saw them get bullied by the Bulldogs. And NC State lost Grayson McCall last week, then struggled to beat Louisiana Tech. They had to come back from behind to do it. I don't know if he'll be back or not. If not, it'll be C.J. Bailey throwing the ball around here. Again, he did lead a comeback from Louisiana Tech last week, but that doesn't mean a whole lot. This does mean something for Clemson, I think, needing to beat a kind of middle-of-the-road team here before playing Stanford next week, followed by road games to Florida State and Wake Forest. I mean, they've got a while to go before they play someone decent again. Louisville in November. So they've got a while to go here. They can still just about win out the rest of the season. That's not hyperbole. This could be a very good team still, but they will have to take on NC State first. I have that as the top slot in the noon window, but you got time to do stuff if you got other things on the slate. Channel Flipper games. North Carolina will be hosting James Madison. North Carolina's 3-0. Wins over Minnesota, Charlotte, North Carolina Central. I don't think it's a particularly threatening team out of the ACC, but they will be hosting James Madison, who in their own right has off to a 3-0 start as well. 2-0 start. They've beaten Charlotte as well, and Gardner-Webb 13-6 hasn't been particularly impressive. They've already taken a bye week as well, but this will be over on the ACC network. We do have West Virginia hosting Kansas as well. West Virginia 1-2. Not a great start here for the Mountaineers. They are favored, though, over a 1-2 Kansas team, and this is the ESPN2 game. So I don't know what that tells you about your options here. West Virginia, of course, pounded by Penn State in the opener. They lost at Pitt last week, 38-34. Pitt might be a team to look forward to here. They did beat Albany 49-14 for what that's worth, but a bit of a struggling team here in West Virginia. Garrett Green not looking like a real sharp quarterback there. Ground game's a little suspect. I don't know, got problems. I think we're gonna get the West Virginia team we expected last year for this season, a team that's going to struggle to make a bowl game, and it's going to be just a huge game for Kansas to try and win on the game on the road, as we discussed earlier. Other notable games to maybe take a quick peek on, or just check the box scores, one or the other. Ohio State will be hosting Marshall. Again, not a big game, but will they beat them by 70 points and pull the starters at half? Probably the case. Will they give up any points? Probably not. This is the Fox game, though. Gross. Very gross. Mississippi State is 1-2. They'll be hosting a 1-2 Florida team on ESPN. Also very disgusting. Indiana, as we discussed, 3-0, will be hosting that Charlotte squad who's 1-2 on the Big Ten Network. Indiana will have an opportunity to beat this squad. They're favored by almost 30 points. How often do you see that for Indiana at any juncture? They murdered UCLA 42-13 last week. They have 150-23 scoring margin over Florida International, WIU, and UCLA the past 3 weeks. Curtis Rourke's completing 74% of his passes, only been dropped a couple times, looking really good. They'll follow that up with games against Maryland and at Northwestern before playing Nebraska. So they have a chance to really roll up some wins here. Keep an eye on the Hoosiers in that noon spot. Maryland will be hosting Villanova. They're heavy favorites in that game. Also on the Big Ten Network. And Cincinnati will be hosting Houston. It's a game. It's on FS1. Cincinnati's 2-1. Houston's pretty gross. They're 1-2. Just not great squads here. They're going to be the bottom feeders, it's looking like, in the Big 12. So let's flip right over to the afternoon here. 24 games on deck. You got a couple in the top watch window. 3:30, USC and Michigan will be battling at it. It's going to be an orgy in Ann Arbor as we see a bit of a reverse role here. The Trojans doing a great job operating at a high octane. That's what I'm trying to say here. They're only 2-0, but they're ranked 11th in the AP poll. They're favored by a handful here in Ann Arbor, as Michigan's going back to the original starter quarterback, just flip-flopping here. They're 2-1. They haven't looked good at all this season. 43.5 point over-under. Again, Michigan's still fielding a really good defense here. USC's taking time for this game. Their defense looks much improved, and the offense looks very difficult to stop. They beat LSU 27-20. They beat Utah State 48-0, and they've had time to prepare for this game. I think this is going to be just a fist fight. This is just going to be a great game. Miller Moss has looked so good. At 2 games, he's completing over 72% of his passes. Just not a lot of takeaway from anything outside the LSU game, quite frankly. In Michigan, we've had 3 samplings now of just really patheticness. And they've played really a decent team in Fresno, an elite team in Texas, and a not-so-great team in Arkansas State, and absolutely nothing has looked real easy for the squad. The defense has given 10, 31, and 18 points up. So I think USC will still be able to move the football here. And, this would just be a good game to see what the hell happens in this one. But USC on the road, man. You got to think that Michigan's going to make a stand here. If there's any chance of that this season, if I were making a pick here, I'd say Michigan covers, but USC wins on the road. It's just not what you expect from Michigan, but we got a whole coaching change here. Got to see how things go. It's a very, very interesting ball game. Could be a playoff eliminator for the Wolverines. 4 o'clock, Utah will be playing Oklahoma State. USC Michigan will be the CBS game, while Utah and Oklahoma State will be playing over on Fox. 14th and 12th are what these teams are ranked, both 3-0. I think Cam Rising's supposed to be back, but we don't know for sure. And quite frankly, we can't rely on Utah's injury reports. Oklahoma State favored by less than a field goal in this one. A few points expected because Oklahoma State, for the love of God, has a hard time stopping anyone. Last week, they did a better job on defense, but they were playing Tulsa 45-10. Arkansas was at 39-31 overtime victory, and South Dakota State was 44-20. They just have some problems defensively. Kevin Ollie has not been as potent on the offensive side. It's been what we thought would be a weakness going into the season in Alan Bowman, completing 67% of his passes, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. And Ollie, 3.5 yards per carry. Not looking as dangerous. So I think things could come crashing down for Oklahoma State, but they are the home team. Utah, if Cam Rising is in, quarterback is still very important. As much as it's a defensive-focused squad, they still need someone to run the quarterback spot in some of these bigger games. That really makes a difference. They beat Baylor, they beat Utah State last week, and they beat SUU from a lower level. Now, the Utah State game last week, 38-21. Again, scraping by in that game, but just not looking good without a reliable quarterback there. But still, have to kind of like Utah to have a chance to go and pull it off if Cam Rising is healthy. If not, we could see a few points with the backup C.J. Bailey there, and I expect Oklahoma State to pull it out. But still, a couple great games there in the afternoon. Your channel flippers. 3:30, Louisville will be hosting Georgia Tech. Louisville's ranked 19th. Georgia Tech is not ranked at the moment. Georgia Tech has played twice as many games as Louisville. Georgia Tech's literally 3-1. Louisville's 2-0. It's kind of hard to comprehend at this particular point. This game will be on ESPN2. But you have to think that playing twice as many games gives you a little bit of an edge, I would think. Now, Louisville's favored by 10.5. A lot is thought of this roster. They've basically had warm-up games so far. APSU, Austin Peay, and Jacksonville State, 62-0 and 49-14. Not a whole lot to show so far. Tyler Shaw is in there under quarterback. He was an Oregon Duck. He was a Texas Tech kid. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for most of his career. He's played pretty clean in these games. Louisville looks to probably have the better roster, but Georgia Tech seems to know what they're doing. 24-21 over Florida State, of course. Win over Georgia State big. Field goal loss at Syracuse, a difficult place to play there, and they thumped VMI last week 59-7, as they should. But this still seems like a very dangerous, frisky team with Haynes King in there, completing 76% of his passes, still running the football pretty effectively. And I would just not put it past the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets at the very least cover and make this a game and keep this very interesting. If the other games, for whatever reason, are not particularly interesting, which I hope they are, but for whatever reason, Georgia Tech Louisville, I think is going to be a very, very good ball game. Also at 3:30, Navy will be hosting Memphis. Memphis, of course, angling for a spot in the playoffs, possibly, to run the American. Again, that high-octane offense. They're favored by 9 on the road. This is on the CBS Sports Network, 49.5 point over-under. Navy goes the other way. Obviously going to be hoping to drain that clock out. Memphis was happy to beat Florida State 20-12, happy to beat Troy 38-17, and happy to beat Northern Alabama 40-0. I don't know if any of these teams have won a game this year. Mostly Northern Alabama. I think they're 0-2 right now. Troy's 0-3, and Florida State's 0-3. No wins among these teams so far, which is wild. Navy is 2-0, and quite frankly, just doing Navy teams, I think it's a decent squad this year. Some years are better than other. Bucknell 49-21, Temple 38-11 are their wins. So I think Memphis will certainly have an opportunity to put up some points here. That's why we're not seeing like a 41.5 point over under something a little lower. But I think Navy will be able to move the ball in Memphis as well. This will just another key channel flipper game that'll be interesting here at 3:30 on CBS. I did put the 4:15, that staggered SEC network game in here. That is Missouri hosting Vanderbilt. Now Vanderbilt, even if they're a touch better roster-wise than they have been in years past, should still probably get shelled by Missouri if they're that good. They're currently ranked 7th in the country. They're 20-point favorites, but Vanderbilt has looked frisky this year, right? They beat Virginia Tech 55-0 on Alcorn State. They did lose 36-32 at Georgia State, which, again, I don't think is an awful football team. But, a team only the bottom handful of teams in the Power Four are going to lose to probably. But that's in a channel flipper. I think Vanderbilt might be able to hang around. Just interesting, just of note. Speaking of note, your other notable afternoon games. Number 20, Iowa State will be hosting Arkansas State at 2 o'clock. That game will be on ESPN+, kind of squirreled away there. Iowa State, heavy favorites, 3 touchdown favorites in that one, as they should be. Hoping to move to 3-0. Coastal Carolina's 3-0, a little bit shocking there, but Virginia will be traveling to their place. They're 2-1. This is the ESPN Plus as well at 2 o'clock. Virginia favored with points, lots of 53.5 points, some points on this one. Penn State favored against Kent State at 3:30 as well on the Big Ten Network, 49. Some of these scores against Kent State are ridiculous, but Penn State only playing their 3rd game of the season as well. LSU and UCLA, 3:30 ABC, looked much better when the season started, but UCLA is a bad football team right now. They're 1-1. They're on the road. They're 3+ touchdown underdogs to the 16th ranked LSU Tigers. Could it be interesting? Maybe, but man, I couldn't even move this into channel flipper with some of the other options. This could be a real wrenching. Notre Dame will be hosting Miami at 3:30. Irish up to 17th in the rankings. Miami of Ohio hasn't won yet. This is on the NBC network. Northern Illinois will be hosting Buffalo at 3:30. They just have to win, man. Well, they've only played 2 games so far this season. Buffalo's 2-1. They're going to have to survive the MAC. They're less than 2 touchdown favorites here. The Buffalo Bulls can do some damage. So not a lot of us are going to be watching the MAC, arguably the worst power-ranked conference in Division I football. So if Northern Illinois goes down, it's probably going to be when we're checking box scores. And we're just going to go, oh, man, well, I guess they're out of the playoffs. So, but they're going to have to make it through Buffalo here pretty early already. Auburn will be hosting Arkansas at 3:30. Auburn, I thought would be a frisky team this year. And, man, I thought they'd hammer Cal, and that did not happen. So we've got a couple 2-1 teams here on ESPN, and it could be one of the least interesting games in this time slot. Auburn's favored by less than a field goal. Virginia Tech will be hosting Rutgers at 3:30. Virginia Tech 2-1, favored by 3.5 at the moment. Not a lot of points expected in this one. The ACC network will be playing this game. Rutgers has an opportunity here now. I think they're a decent football team. They've beaten Howard and Akron. Doesn't get much worse than that. So we have no idea what it's going to look like when they go on the road here to play Virginia Tech in the afternoon. And then they got Washington next week, followed by at Nebraska, home against Wisconsin, home against UCLA. So if they really show something here on the road against maybe middling Virginia Tech to lower Virginia Tech, depending on how we feel about this team, then maybe they could win, 3 of the next 4. Washington might be okay, but they get that game at home. Wisconsin, I don't know. UCLA's bad. Nebraska seems to be pretty reliable, but Rutgers can win some games. They still have Minnesota at home later in the year. They play at Maryland, not sure about that, at Michigan State. So Rutgers will get their first sampling of a real opponent here. I mean, like a real opponent, because they've played no one so far. Virginia Tech, of course, disappointed in the opener, losing at Vanderbilt 34-27. Can't do that. Then they beat Marshall and Old Dominion pretty soundly. So this is a team that returned all but one or two starters altogether. So just a squad you'd expect a little bit more of. Didn't make a bowl game last year, but just expected more of with Kyron Drones, a good dual threat quarterback there. And he's just been underwhelming, I should say. Overwhelmingly underwhelming. And I just got to see more from him. But Rutgers and Virginia Tech, almost a channel flipper, but it could be just a real sloppy mess there. Pitt will be hosting Youngstown State. They are 3+ touchdown favorites. No surprise over the Penguins, I believe it is. Now, they've beaten West Virginia, Cincinnati, Kent State. Not great teams, but they were expected to not be so great themselves. So wins over Cincinnati on the road and West Virginia kind of boosts them up a little bit, right? 3-0, can make a bowl game. So they've got one here on ESPN Plus where they can move to 4-0. Texas Tech will be hosting Arizona State at 3:30 on FS1. Texas Tech favored by a field goal here. Texas Tech is not good. Texas Tech is just not good. They won 52-51 over Abilene Christie. They lost 37-16 at Washington State, and then they beat North Texas 66-21. Now, North Texas can score some, but it's still like a team that should be putting up points in the Conference USA. Is that what they're in now? Not a team that should be, in striking distance of a Power 4 school, quite frankly. Don't have a lot of belief in the Red Raiders. Arizona State, I might be the best of the worst. Again, I think they're well coached by Kenny Dillingham. They beat Wyoming, who I think is bad. Mississippi State, who is apparently really bad. And they had a fine win over Texas State. It'd be nice if they could win here over Texas Tech, wouldn't it? Kansas next week, followed by Utah. This team can make a bowl game. Yeah, it's not super expected, but it's possible. The quarterback under center there, Sam Leavitt, was one of the two that transferred out of Michigan State. Not completing a lot of passes, but can scramble the pocket a little bit. Just an interesting team there. I know I noted them in the preseason as an interesting team to kind of check in on once in a while. And this may be one of those games to keep an eye on, I think. Finally, 4 o'clock, we have Middle Tennessee hosting Duke. Duke's 3-0. This is on ESPNU. Duke favored by a couple touchdowns on the road. It's really a miracle that they're undefeated. They've beaten Elon, and they didn't even cover that game. They won at Northwestern by less than a touchdown, and they beat Connecticut by less than a touchdown. This is not a good football team by any stretch. They're favored by a significant margin over a bad Middle Tennessee team. It's too bad Malik Murphy sat for a couple years behind Ewers at Texas. Looked like a starting caliber quarterback. He's performing fine, but this team around him is really not good. Like, they have no ground game. The offensive line, I don't even know. Maybe he's got a receiver in Jordan Moore. But, yeah, they'll have to pick up a win here because they may not see too many more the rest of the season here. So moving into our evening slate, 23 games. I've got 2 in the top watches category, which may be a little surprising when you hear the lineup here. 7 o'clock, I do have South Florida hosting Miami on the slate. Miami is ranked 8th right now. South Florida is 2-1. Miami's favored by 17. This is the ESPN big time game. 65 points is where we're sitting right now, and a toasty 85 degrees. Probably getting a little cooler under the lights, and I'm expecting this to be a fun one. Now, South Florida and their quarterback there, Bynum Brown, is a fun guy. He Scooby-Doos around, scrambles. He's the team leading rusher right now. Couple touchdowns, couple 100 yards on the ground. He's completing only 56% of his passes right now. They did get their doors blown off eventually by Alabama last week or 2 weeks ago. The buys are throwing me off now. They beat Southern Mississippi 49-24 last week, and they've beat BCU 48-3 as well. So this would be another big test on their schedule before they go into American Conference play. But this is just kind of a little bit of a sneaky team, I think. Now, Miami has looked great. They could very well come in and punish the Bulls. Miami, I think, is a dark horse championship team. They are playing very well. Now, the teams they played, they won in Miami opening day. They beat Florida opening day on the road, 41-17. Florida's going down the pipes real quick. They beat Florida A&M and Ball State. So that's not saying a whole lot, right? But our transfer quarterback here, Cameron Ward, finally looks like a superstar. 73% completion percentage, 11-1 touchdown to interception ratio, not really getting hit. They can run the ball. They're pretty good on both sides of the line of scrimmage in the trenches there. And it just looks like a really good football team. But they were sort of tested once in the opener against a team that's probably below average overall. And the Swamps, probably as full as it was going to be on opening day, but still. South Florida, I think, is going to be a little bit of a challenge here. Technically a road game, but it's all an in-state battle here. And I think this is just... Last year, South Florida held Alabama to 17 points. And they had them a little in a kerfuffle at the first half this year as well, before losing 42-16. The halftime score was 14-6, so they were very much in it before things got a little bit out of control in the second half. It's just a team that's very feisty and just, a team that Miami's obviously favored very heavily against. But the quarterback can do some damage. They're effective running the football. The defense has not measured up to be very good, but they can get after the quarterback a little bit. And it just seems like they could push Miami a little bit more than folks may think. So I have that up as a top watch. I think it's really worth actually investing time to watch this football game. Now, at 7:30, just a half hour later, you'll get Oklahoma hosting Tennessee, which is one of the big games on the slate, and an SEC game as it stands right now. Tennessee finally tested, ranked number 6 right now. This is the ABC game. Number 15 is the number next to Oklahoma right now. Tennessee favored right around a touchdown on the road, but this number's actually been fluctuating a bit. 56.5 point over-under. That's because the defense for Tennessee is actually pretty good. Defensive line's doing pretty well as well. They have a stellar defensive end, Pierce Jr. over there, who's going to cause some problems. And it sure seems like Oklahoma's defense is going to cause some problems for Tennessee as well, and their true freshman quarterback, Nico, over there. It just seems like both defenses are ahead of both offenses, so we're actually going to get a lower scoring game, as opposed to some folks that are just going to sit down and say, hey, Oklahoma, they just throw the ball around, right? In Tennessee, we'll get some of the same. We'll get like 70 points in this game. I don't think so. I don't think you're going to come anywhere near that. So this is going to be a really good football game. We're going to see if Tennessee might actually have, with a young quarterback, mind you, but still some horses that can take the ball to the house and some good trenches play. Tennessee, again, could be in the playoffs. It could be an interesting team. We're going to see what they can do on the road here playing Oklahoma. And they beat Chattanooga, NC State, which continues to look worse and worse, but 51-10 was the score there. And they wasted a bad Kent State team last week. So again, 2 not good quality opponents at all, and one team that might be a below average performer possibly. First road game as well, so just keep that in mind. Oklahoma beat Temple, barely survived a bad Houston team, and beat Tulane, who's probably not that bad last week. They have not left home either. So just keep that in mind. And they're welcoming in a big challenge here. This is going to be a great game. Oklahoma, probably a long shot to make the playoffs just because of the depth of the SEC. This would really be a reach up for them to knock off Tennessee here. I think there's a lot of expectations still for Oklahoma to kind of grow into a role, into a spot here in the SEC, and to be able to crack like the top 4 and make a playoff. Not even this year, but in the future. Like, that's not going to be a regular spot for them necessarily. Not with a Georgia and Alabama. Maybe a Texas will secure a spot up there. and then a rotating gambit of a Texas A&M, or maybe Tennessee will make it back up there again, or an Auburn or Florida any given year. Like, can Oklahoma be up there, assuming some of these power conferences like the Big Ten or the SEC get as many as 4 teams in? Is Oklahoma going to be like in the top quarter of the SEC and have the chance to do that? Not a lot of expectations there. Tennessee figures to be one of those teams this year by a lot of folks, and they look really good. I'm tempted to really say, Tennessee can do some damage here, but it's possible. Oklahoma, with one of the better secondaries in the country right now, can really cause some problems for a young quarterback there, and we see like a low-scoring slugfest that brings out some different dimensions in both these teams than what we've seen so far, and we get just a really interesting ball game here. Your channel flippers in the evening slot as well. Now, I do have the 6 o'clock that starts before either of the top shelf games here. Liberty, which has been just barely making it past opponents. Don't forget, Liberty at one point was thought to be one of the top teams to compete for a playoff spot. Easiest schedule in the country. Returns a lot of key players. They're struggling so far this season to, really put teams away. Beat Campbell 41-24. New Mexico State 30-24. UTEP 28-10. And it's kind of been a slugfest for Liberty. They're not looking real great. You figure one slip up and they're done, even if they win Conference USA. Keldon Salter, 66% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns through the air. And he's not running as much as he has in past years. They're still doing a good job on the ground, but man, this team's just not looking the same as it was last year. They're always going to be a possible upset victim, but I still think there's room for them to grow a little bit here. But they're less than a touchdown favorite at home on this ESPN Plus game hosting East Carolina, a team that doesn't make a bowl game very often. But how can you hate the Purple Pirates? How can you hate those folks? Now, they lost to Appalachian State, who continues to look more mediocre and more mediocre. Last week by 2 points. They beat Old Dominion. They beat Norfolk State. So they don't exactly have a great resume. But what does that tell us about Liberty? That they're not even favored by a touchdown at home against the Pirates. I'm just saying. Keep an eye on Liberty against one of the better teams on their schedule, possibly here. The other 2 channel flip games I have are at 8 o'clock. The first one is Boston College hosting Michigan State. And the second will be Colorado hosting Baylor. Obviously, you can't miss Colorado and what they got going on. And they're not heavy favorites over the Baylor Bears. Honestly, I haven't got a lot of eyes on Baylor recently. So this will definitely be on the top of my list to get a peek at. Baylor tried to keep things on the rails there after a couple of unsuccessful seasons, but this game will be on Fox. Both teams sitting at 2-1 right now. Baylor got a nice win over Air Force, 31-3 last week. They did lose to Utah, 23-12, as stated previously. Quarterback injury in the Utah game. Sawyer Robinson, an interesting quarterback there. They also have transferred Daquan Finn, who came in from Toledo as well, but he's been riding the struggle bus. It sucks to see him at a power program and really having problems. He was pretty good at Toledo. But Sawyer Robinson completing 72% of his passes. I'm not quite sure which quarterback will be coming into this game starting. However, will Colorado be able to survive this? Will be interesting. The line is sitting at less than a field goal at the moment. Always interesting. Never a dull moment with Colorado. Lots of points expected in this one. And the ACC network will have 2 interesting quarterbacks. I think if you had to make a selection between will Boston College make a bowl game, will Michigan State make a bowl game, or both make a bowl game, the answer with the most votes would probably that neither would. But we have Adrian Chiles and Matt Castellanos at quarterback here. And I think they're both interesting prospects to keep an eye on, at least for college football. And this will be one of the more interesting games on the late night slate. As far as notables here, we do have SMU hosting TCU at 5 o'clock. 2 teams that have their struggles already this season, but they'll be doing Big 12 battle on the CW network, both sitting at 2-1. TCU slight favorite on the road. A few points expected in this one. In the 7 o'clock slot, we have Washington hosting Northwestern on FS1, both sitting at 2-1. Washington, of course, losing the Apple Cup last week, the rivalry game there. Favored by almost double digits over Northwestern. Very interesting there as they try to get back on track. We also have Western Kentucky hosting Toledo. Just worth noting, Toledo's still undefeated. This will be squirreled away on ESPN+. Toledo's still looking like a solid football team in the MAC, but they're 2.5 point favorites at Western Kentucky. Florida State, still winless, hosting the mighty undefeated Golden Bears of Cal at 7 o'clock as well. They are favored at home, so this is a game you can go out and bet. This is the ESPN2 game, less than a field goal here in Tallahassee. So keep an eye on that as well. Interesting that Cal technically has not played an ACC conference game yet. Florida State already 0-2 in the conference. I mean, their season is like cooked. So just doesn't get any worse, really. 7:30 brings us number 25, Texas A&M hosting Bowling Green. If it's 7:30 on ESPN+, heavy favorites there for Texas A&M, trying out a new quarterback there. Then South Carolina hosting Akron at 7:30 as well. Akron not a great team. South Carolina trying to build up a nice resume. This is the ESPNU game. Gamecocks heavy favorites. Minnesota hosting Iowa at 7:30 on NBC. Neither of these teams have high expectations this season. Iowa favored by field goal here. 35.5 point over-unders. Iowa is still interesting. If they can get this offense rolling, they can still win 10 games. I mean, this team could still make the playoffs, and we may not be talking about them for another month. Ole Miss will be hosting Georgia Southern at 7:45 on the SEC network. They must be purposely, doing these stagger start times. Ole Miss favored by 37. Do you think they'll cover? Lane Kiffin is sure trying to. Texas will be hosting Louisiana Monroe at 8. Tune in for Arch Manning in that one. 8:30 will be New Mexico hosting Fresno State. Hoping, of course, to get on track to win the Mountain West there. This will be the first conference game for both of these squads. Fresno favored by almost 2 touchdowns. That is on True TV. Texas will be on the ESPN Plus, buried on that network. So that may be a highlight or box score watcher, unfortunately. Your late night slate has 3 games, and there's a clear favorite here. 9:45, Boise State will be hosting Portland State on FS1 as they look to pile up those stats for their mighty running back there. Ashton Jante was 459 yards and 9 touchdowns through 2 games this year. 2 games. Then we have BYU hosting Kansas State at 10:30. Kansas State the favorite here, but both teams are undefeated at this moment. Kansas State is ranked 13th. This is on ESPN, the late night game, the top late night watch. They're favored by a touchdown on the road. However, Avery Johnson does not look so great throwing the football. The back end of the defense does give up some passing yards so far this year, and that's where BYU excels. They do not run very well, but they have a lot of explosive plays. This could be a very interesting football game on the late night slate. Don't miss a home team possibly rushing the field if they knock off Kansas State, the Wildcats. And finally, of course, we have our midnight on the East Coast topper with Hawaii hosting Northern Iowa. Hawaii, about a touchdown favorite in that one. So moving on to our categories. Our top watch. Several candidates here. Oklahoma at Tennessee is your best bet, I would think, even though there's a decent spread on that game. Michigan and USC certainly in the conversation as well. Oklahoma State, Utah, you could put a bid in for that one as well. That noon slate is obviously pretty open. That's where I would go for my audible, my flip over game, and that's still a tough slot there. But I still like to see what Kansas can do with Jalen Daniels. That is my audible channel flip game if things get kind of dull. It's already my channel flip section. But Kansas at West Virginia is probably a game that's going to get more eyes for me. Also, I really am going to get more eyes, I think, on both Indiana and Ohio State. Ohio State's going to pull its starters, but Indiana at Charlotte to see what that game can do since there's not a whole lot going on in that particular window. Your small screen starlet. That's not a ton of options for this year with a number of conference movement, realignment. Now, Liberty at East Carolina is certainly an option because there could be an upset there, but there can also be an upset when Memphis goes on the road to Navy. As mentioned previously, keep an eye on that. Memphis at Navy. Road team, tough, right? Completely contrasting styles. Could be a quick game if over, the pace, if Navy's able to control the pace there. So that is my small screen starlet between non-Power 5 schools. My underrated game of the week is a little bit tricky. I like Georgia Tech at Louisville, though. Let's see if Georgia Tech can challenge Louisville again. They have to go on the road and pull an upset. It's always a little bit more difficult, but they played twice as many games, and Louisville's played nobody. Now, they're coming off a bye. They've had a chance to prepare, but let's see what Georgia Tech can do at Louisville. And your light night snack here is the obvious one. At least catch part of BYU Kansas State before you hit the sack and see if BYU can possibly pull an upset in the opening of Big 12 play for both of these squads. That is the Michael Welch podcast for today. Thank you very much. That's college football. We'll tackle a little NFL soon. I've obviously got eyes on that too, but need to gather some more thoughts on that. We'll have Elliot in as well soon too, so enjoy your games, and we'll chat with you later. Thank you.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one. I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a